The air on Calavigny Island tasted of salt and betrayal. One moment, Hayley Devereux was the pregnant, adored wife of a tech billionaire. The next, she was a spectacle of public humiliation. Under the glittering lights of his lavish party, her husband, Sebastian, didn't just end their marriage. He detonated it. With his mistress clinging to his arm, he publicly renounced Hayley and the child she carried, leaving her stranded on his private paradise as a tropical storm gathered on the horizon. He thought he had erased her, but he made one fatal mistake. He left her alive. The journey to Calavigny Island began not with the gentle hum of the Gulf Stream G750, but with the subtle, chilling click of a platinum lighter. Sebastian Devereux lit his Cuban cigar, the cherry glowing like a malevolent eye in the jet's dim cabin. He didn't offer one to his associates, and he didn't look at his wife, Hayley, who sat across from him, her hands resting protectively on the swell of her 5-month pregnancy. "It has to be perfect, Jenna," he said, his voice a low baritone that had charmed boardrooms and investors into handing over fortunes. The smoke he exhaled coiled towards the ceiling. "This party isn't just a party. It's a statement. It's the culmination of the Ethelred acquisition. Everyone who is anyone will be there. We need to project unassailable strength." Hayley managed a small smile. "Everything you do is perfect, Seb." It was the answer he expected, the one she had learned to give. Their life was a meticulously curated exhibition of success, and she was its most beautiful, most serene installation. They had met 3 years prior at a Sotheby's auction. She was a junior art consultant, advising a client on a minor Degas sculpture. He wasn't bidding. He was buying the auction house. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, with a passion that felt alien in his world of algorithms and market capitalizations. For Hayley, a woman raised by a university professor and a librarian in a quiet corner of Connecticut, Sebastian was a force of nature. His ambition was a gravitational pull she couldn't resist. He'd showered her with a life ripped from the pages of a luxury magazine, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a villa in Lake Como, and a wardrobe that cost more than her parents' house. He loved her, she believed, for being his anchor, his peace in a world of cutthroat competition. But the gilded cage, no matter how opulent, was still a cage. Her opinions on art were now used to decorate his corporate lobbies. Her friends with their normal jobs and mortgages were politely phased out in favor of his circle of venture capitalists, socialites, and tech titans. He had even chosen the dress she was to wear tonight, a flowing seafoam green gown by a designer she'd never heard of, one that was meant to showcase her pregnancy in the most elegant, non-threatening way possible. "The Beaumonts are arriving just after us." Sebastian continued scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. "Blake Beaumont is a potential board member for the new conglomerate. His wife, Victoria. She can be a bit much, but she's influential. Be charming to her." Hayley's smile tightened. Victoria Beaumont, a woman sculpted from marble and disdain, who looked at Hayley as if she were a charming but ultimately temporary pet. Victoria was from Sebastian's world, old money, predatory ambition, and a shared history that was often hinted at but never clarified. The jet began its descent, breaking through a layer of pillowy clouds to reveal a turquoise expanse dotted with emerald islands. In the center, like a jewel, was Calavigny. It was Sebastian's ultimate status symbol, an 80-acre private island in the Grenadines that he'd purchased for an obscene sum. He'd spent 2 years and $100 million transforming it into his personal fiefdom, a paradise of Balinese-style villas, private beaches and manicured jungle paths. As the plane touched down on the private airstrip, the cabin door opened to a wall of humid, fragrant air. A fleet of custom golf carts waited to whisk them to the main residence, a sprawling architectural masterpiece named the Overlook. Staff in crisp white uniforms lined the path, their heads bowed. It was a royal welcome. "Remember, Jenna?" Sebastian murmured, his hand on the small of her back, his touch feeling more like a positioning than a caress. Flawless. "Tonight we are untouchable." She nodded the baby inside her, giving a gentle kick a secret reassurance. She walked beside her husband into the heart of the magnificent home. The sound of a string quartet already drifting from the grand terrace. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter mingling with the clinking of champagne flutes. Everything was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was, by all accounts, perfect. But as a grey bank of clouds began to mass on the distant horizon, Haley felt a shiver of unease, a premonition as dark and foreboding as the coming storm. The perfect world Sebastian had built felt impossibly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for a single, malicious puff of wind. She was about to find out that the wind was already in the room, and it was wearing Victoria Beaumont's smile. The party was an exercise in calculated excess. An oyster bar featured mollusks flown in from 5 different countries. A vodka luge carved from a single block of ice into a replica of Sebastian's corporate logo was the centerpiece of the main bar. Tech billionaires mingled with European aristocrats and supermodels, laughed with grizzled hedge fund managers. Haley played her part, a gracious hostess, floating through the crowd, her hand never far from her belly. She saw Sebastian across the infinity pool, locked in conversation with Blake and Victoria Beaumont. Victoria was dazzling in a crimson dress that seemed to defy gravity. She laughed at something Sebastian said, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm and letting it linger just a moment too long. Haley had seen that gesture 100 times, a casual mark of territory that set her teeth on edge. She told herself it was just the paranoia of pregnancy. She turned to greet a senator from New York, discussing a recent museum gala when she felt a presence behind her. "You're glowing," Victoria purred, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Pregnancy suits you. It's so domestic." Haley forced a smile. "Thank you, Victoria. I see you're enjoying the party." "Oh, it's a Sebastian Devereaux party." "They're always legendary," Victoria replied, her eyes scanning Haley from head to toe. "That's a lovely color on you. Did Sebastian pick it out?" He always had such specific tastes. The implication was clear. Another subtle jab to remind Haley of her place. Before she could respond, a low rumble echoed from across the sea. The wind picked up, rustling the palm fronds and making the paper lanterns dance violently. The sky, once a canvas of pastel sunset hues, was now a bruised purple. "Looks like we're in for a show," Victoria said with a smirk, seemingly unbothered. An hour later, the show began. The storm hit not with a gentle prelude, but with a sudden, furious onslaught. Rain came down in blinding sheets, driving the guests from the exposed terraces into the cavernous main hall of the Overlook. The string quartet was replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive crash of waves against the cliffs below. The lights flickered, casting the panicked faces of the elite in a strobe-like effect. In the ensuing chaos, Haley searched for Sebastian. She found him near the grand fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking utterly calm. He was with Victoria again. Blake was nowhere to be seen. Seb, the staff, is trying to get everyone to the storm shelters in the guest villas. Haley said, her voice tight with anxiety. We should coordinate, he cut her off. His eyes cold and distant. Everything is under control, Haley. Go and rest. You look pale. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. Hurt and confused, she began to walk away, but his next words stopped her dead. She knows, Vic. It's time. The words were a low murmur, but in a sudden lull in the storm's fury, they carried across the marble floor with perfect, devastating clarity. Haley turned back slowly. Victoria was looking at her, a triumphant, pitying smile on her face. Sebastian's expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. Knows what Seb, Haley asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. What's going on? Sebastian sighed, a theatrical sound of weary impatience. He took a step forward, and the small crowd that had been huddled nearby fell silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The drama of the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing within the walls of the Overlook. This, he said, gesturing vaguely between himself and Haley. This arrangement, it has run its course. Haley's blood ran cold. Arrangement? You mean our marriage? I mean, the charade. He corrected his voice, rising, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. He was performing now. This was his stage. I needed a certain image for the Ethelred deal. A stable, traditional man. You played that part beautifully, I'll admit. A collective gasp went through the audience of his peers. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Haley felt her face flush with heat, 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her humiliation. The deal is done. Sebastian continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. My company is secure, and I no longer require the props. Props. Her voice was a choked whisper. She looked down at her own hands, resting on the life inside her. Is that what your son is to you? A prop. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. My son? Oh, Haley, you are delightfully naive. I have my lawyers the best in the world. They've raised some very interesting questions about the timeline of your pregnancy, about your fidelity. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a lie, a monstrous, baseless lie. But he said it with such conviction that doubt flickered in the eyes of the onlookers. He was poisoning the well, destroying her reputation to ensure his own clean getaway. That's not true, she breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. You know that's not true. Does it matter? He shot back. I'm Sebastian Devereux. My truth is the one that gets printed. He then turned and took Victoria's hand, pulling her to his side. He held her hand up for all to see. Victoria and I are going to be together. It's been a long time coming. She understands my world. She belongs in it. Victoria looked at Haley, her eyes gleaming with victory. She had won. You will be given a severance, Sebastian said, as if firing a disloyal employee. Generous, of course. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you will disappear quietly. My jet will take you back to the mainland in the morning after the storm passes. The staff will show you to a guest room. He turned his back on her, a final, brutal act of dismissal. He had just executed her socially and emotionally in front of the most powerful people he knew. Stranded pregnant and publicly branded an unfaithful, disposable wife, Haley stood frozen in the center of the room. The lights flickered again, and then died, completely plunging the hall into darkness, save for the frantic beams of staff flashlights and the periodic terrifying flashes of lightning from outside. In that moment of absolute darkness, a tear finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It felt as hot as acid. The gilded cage hadn't just opened. It had been vaporized, and she was left falling with no ground in sight. The darkness was a perverse mercy. It hid the smirks, the pitying glances, the avid curiosity on the faces of the guests. A member of the staff, a young woman named Sophia, whose kindness had always seemed genuine, gently touched Haley's arm. "Ma'am, let me take you to your room. It's not safe here." Haley allowed herself to be led away, moving like a sleepwalker through the opulent halls that now felt like a mausoleum. The room they took her to was not her own. It was a sterile, impersonal guest suite at the far end of the estate, as far from Sebastian as possible. Sophia lit some candles, her expression full of a sorrow she couldn't voice. "Is there anything I can get you?" "Mrs. Devereux." The name was a slap. "Don't call me that," Haley whispered, her voice raw. "My name is Haley McClellan." Reclaiming her maiden name was the first act of defiance, a tiny spark in the crushing darkness. Sophia nodded and quietly left, closing the door behind her. Haley was alone with the roaring storm and the ruins of her life. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her body trembling. The baby kicked a frantic, insistent rhythm, as if sensing its mother's distress. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was terrified. Sebastian's lie about her fidelity wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a strategic move to disown their child, to absolve himself of all responsibility, to paint her as a gold-digging fraud. He controlled the media, the lawyers, the narrative. If she stayed, she'd be trapped in a public relations war she couldn't possibly win. He would crush her. She and her child would be footnotes in the story of his glorious rise, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She couldn't let that happen. Her child deserved more than a life lived in the shadow of Sebastian's lies. An idea, wild and desperate, began to form. Disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. He expected her to take his severance and slink away broken. He would never expect her to simply cease to exist. The storm was her cover. The chaos was her opportunity. Driven by a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity, Haley stood up. She couldn't take anything that belonged to him. Not the designer clothes in the closet, not the jewels in the safe. She took off the 7-carat diamond ring he'd placed on her finger and set it on the nightstand. It felt like removing a shackle. She was wearing only the seafoam green gown, now damp and stained. It would have to do. She went to the window. It overlooked a steep garden path that led down towards a small, private cove, one rarely used by guests. The rain was relentless, turning the manicured landscape into a treacherous river of mud. It was dangerous, but staying was a death sentence of a different kind. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out of the villa. The wind tore at her, plastering the thin fabric of her dress to her body. She was instantly soaked to the bone. Her hair whipped across her face, blinding her. She half ran, half slid down the muddy path, grabbing onto tree trunks and roots to keep from falling. Thorns tore at her dress and her skin. The perfect paradise had become a hostile wilderness. She reached the cove. The waves were monstrous, crashing against the rocks with a terrifying power. A small boat dock used for jet skis and tenders was being battered by the surf. Tied to it was a small inflatable Zodiac boat, its motor covered with a tarp probably left by a maintenance worker who had fled for shelter. It was her only chance. Her fingers were numb with cold as she struggled with the ropes. A massive wave crashed over the dock, nearly sweeping her off her feet. She clung to her, piling her knuckles white. The baby felt like a lead weight in her belly. "We can do this," she thought, a mantra against the screaming wind. "We have to do this." Finally, the last knot gave way. She clambered into the Zodiac, her body screaming with protest. She fumbled with the tarp, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip it. She pulled the cord on the small outboard motor. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Panic began to set in. On the third pull, a wave of desperation lending her strength. The motor sputtered to life with a choked cough. She steered the small boat away from the island into the churning Black Sea. It was an act of insanity. The Zodiac was tossed about like a toy, cresting massive waves that threatened to swallow it whole. Salt spray stung her eyes, and the roar of the engine was lost in the fury of the storm. She had no idea where she was going, only that she was moving away from Sebastian, away from the life that had tried to destroy her. She didn't know how long she fought the storm. It could have been minutes or hours. Her arms ached, her body was bruised, and a chilling exhaustion was seeping into her bones. The lights of Calivigny Island were long gone. She was a tiny, insignificant speck in a world of violent water and wind. Just as she felt her strength give out, as the engine sputtered and died, a light cut through the rain. It was a beam, powerful and steady, sweeping across the waves. It found her. The beam belonged to a larger vessel, a sturdy-looking yacht that was riding out the storm in the lee of a neighboring smaller island. Men were shouting. A rope ladder was thrown down. Strong hands pulled her from the half-swamped Zodiac onto the deck of the yacht. She collapsed, shivering and incoherent, into the arms of a figure who wrapped her in a thick, dry blanket. She looked up into the face of an old man, with kind, concerned eyes and a shock of white hair. He was a guest from the party she vaguely recalled, an investor from a bygone era, one who had watched the evening's drama unfold with a quiet, thoughtful detachment. "You're safe now, my dear," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "My name is Desmond Wallace, and I think it's fair to say your life has just taken a rather dramatic turn. Let's get you warm, and then we can decide what comes next." As she slipped into an exhausted unconsciousness, Hayley McClellan knew one thing for certain. Her old life was over, drowned in the storm. A new one, terrifying and unknown, had just begun. The next 5 years were a lifetime. Hayley awoke on Desmond Wallace's yacht, the Wanderer. Not as a victim, but as a blank slate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and a sea as calm as glass. Calivigny Island was a distant smudge on the horizon, a place she vowed never to see again, not as she was. Desmond Wallace was more than just a kind stranger. He was a legend in the world of old money and discreet power. A self-made shipping magnate who had cashed out decades ago, he had watched men like Sebastian Devereux, arrogant, flashy, and ultimately hollow, rise and fall like the tides. He had seen the cruelty at the party, and in Hayley he saw not a broken woman, but a core of tempered steel she didn't yet know she possessed. He made a grave error, Hayley Desmond told her over a cup of tea in his yacht's study. A room panelled in rich mahogany and lined with books. He underestimated you. Men like Devereux always do. They see a beautiful wife, not a brilliant partner. Their ego is their Achilles' heel. He offered her a choice. He could arrange for her to be safely and anonymously returned to the United States with a small trust fund to start over. Or she could stay with him, learn from him, and forge a new identity, a new life on her own terms. Revenge is a fool's game. He said, his gaze steady. But justice is the business of building a better future on the wreckage of the past. He tried to erase you. The greatest justice it is not to haunt him, but to become someone he could never imagine. Haley chose the latter. Her son was born 3 months later in a private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland. She named him Leo for the lion-hearted courage he had given her. Holding him for the first time, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was building a dynasty for him, a legacy free from the taint of the Devereaux name. Under Desmond's tutelage, Haley McClellan ceased to exist. In her place emerged Haley Monroe, a name chosen for its classic strength. She devoured Desmond's library, learning about global finance, sovereign debt, emerging markets, and corporate law. She had a natural aptitude for seeing patterns, a skill honed during her years studying art history, and she applied it to the complex tapestry of the financial world. Desmond treated her like the daughter he never had. He taught her how to negotiate with sharks, how to leverage debt, how to create shell corporations and offshore accounts, not for evasion, but for protection and strategic advantage. He refined her, sharpening her intellect until it was a weapon. She learned 4 languages. She traveled with him on the Wanderer, sitting in on meetings in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Monaco, a silent observer who absorbed everything. Leo grew up on the yacht, his world a shifting landscape of international ports and the unwavering love of his mother. He had her thoughtful eyes, and to Haley's secret, painful acknowledgement, Sebastian's determined chin. He was smart, resilient, and knew nothing of the father who had disowned him. His father, in every way that mattered, was the kind old man who taught him how to fish off the coast of Greece and read him stories about great explorers. When Leo was 4, Desmond's health began to fail. He had lived a full life and was ready for its final chapter. One afternoon, anchored off the coast of Croatia, he called Haley to his study. "I'm not leaving you a fortune, my dear," he said, his voice weaker now, but still clear. "I'm leaving you an arsenal. The companies, the accounts, the contacts, they are all tools. What you build with them is up to you." He passed away a week later, peacefully in his sleep. His will was simple. The bulk of his vast, labyrinthine estate was left to a charitable foundation, but a significant, strategically chosen portfolio of assets, worth nearly $1 billion if managed correctly, was left to one Haley Monroe. Along with it was a single sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter. "My dearest Haley, I hope I have given you the means to secure your and Leo's future. But I know you. You have a fire in you that peace alone will not quench. There is one piece of unfinished business. I have learned through my network that Sebastian Devereaux is selling Calivigny Island. His tech empire is over-leveraged, and he needs liquid capital. He sees the island as a monument to a past triumph. I see it as a stage. Go and claim it. Not for revenge, but to prove once and for all that the future is not written by the men who build gilded cages, but by the women who learn to fly out of them. Your friend Desmond." Reading the letter, Haley felt a chill run down her spine. The island, the site of her greatest humiliation. For 5 years, She had meticulously built a fortress around her heart, focusing only on the future. But Desmond was right. To truly be free, she had to go back to the beginning. She had to face the ghost of her past. She looked at the financial reports Desmond had left her. She saw the network of holding companies, the web of assets. She began to formulate a plan, not with the desperation of an escaped victim, but with the cold, calculating precision of a corporate raider. Sebastian Devereux thought he had destroyed Haley McClellan 5 years ago in a storm. He had no idea that he had inadvertently forged Haley Monroe in the crucible of his own cruelty. And she was coming back to collect. The sale of Calavigny Island was not a public affair. It was a quiet, discreet offering circulated among the world's ultra-elite through a handful of exclusive brokerage firms in Zurich and London. Sebastian Devereux, true to form, couldn't bear the public humiliation of a fire sale. The official narrative was that he was realigning his portfolio to focus on new philanthropic ventures. It was a lie, and everyone in his circle knew it. His tech company, Ethelred, once the darling of Silicon Valley, was hemorrhaging money. A series of disastrous product launches and a nasty patent lawsuit had eroded investor confidence. The stock was in a death spiral. Sebastian and Victoria's lavish lifestyle, once funded by soaring profits, was now financed by debt. The island was his most liquid, most valuable, non-corporate asset. He needed to sell, and he needed to sell fast. From a quiet, modern office in Geneva, Haley Monroe orchestrated her attack. She was no longer a woman in a seafoam green dress. She was a spectre in the machine, a name on a letterhead that no one could trace back to the wife Sebastian had discarded. She operated through 3 different shell corporations, registered in 3 different countries. A real estate holding firm in the Cayman Islands, a financial services company in Luxembourg, and a consulting group in Delaware. Each was a cutout, a layer of insulation between her and the final transaction. Her lead negotiator was a shrewd, silver-haired Swiss lawyer named Anton Gruber, a man who had been fiercely loyal to Desmond Wallace for 40 years. He never asked about his new client's motives. He only executed her instructions with brutal efficiency. Sebastian's asking price was $150 million. It was inflated based on what he had spent on it, not its current market value. He's sentimental, and he's desperate, Haley told Anton over a secure video call. His ego won't let him accept a low-ball offer, so we won't make one. We will make him feel like he's winning right up until the end. Their first move was to create a competitor. Haley used the Delaware Corporation to put in a deliberately clumsy low offer of $90 million, leaking it to a financial gossip blog. The story framed it as an insult, a sign of Devereux's fallen status. Sebastian, predictably, was enraged. He publicly rejected the offer, his pride forcing him to hold firm on his price. That was when Anton Gruber, representing the Luxembourg firm Orion Capital, entered the picture. He approached Sebastian's brokers with a much more serious offer of $125 million. He was professional, courteous, and projected an air of immense old-world wealth. After the insult of the first bid, Sebastian saw Orion Capital as a serious, respectable buyer. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Sebastian, squeezed by his creditors, pushed for a higher price. Haley, through Anton, held firm. She knew Sebastian's quarterly earnings report was due to be released, and she had done her homework. It was going to be a bloodbath. The day the disastrous report was published, Ethelred stock plunged another 30%. Sebastian's bankers were calling. The pressure was immense. That same afternoon, Anton received a call. Sebastian would accept the $125 million, but he had one condition: a fast, all-cash closing in under a week, with no contingencies. It was a move designed to weed out anyone who didn't have immediate access to that kind of capital. "He is testing us," Anton told Haley. "He believes no one can move that quickly." "He's right," Haley said with a thin smile. "No one can. But we can." She initiated a complex series of wire transfers, moving funds from various accounts Desmond had left, her routing them through the Cayman Islands holding company, and finally consolidating them in an escrow account managed by Orion Capital in Zurich. It was a symphony of international finance, conducted flawlessly. 5 days later, the deal was ready to close. The final contracts were to be signed. The buyer was listed as Kalivigny Holdings Limited, a subsidiary of Orion Capital. The signatory for the buyer was Anton Gruber. Haley's name was nowhere on the documents. From her office in Geneva, she watched a live feed from the closing room in Zurich. She saw Sebastian Devereux on the screen, looking older and more strained than she remembered. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle facade. Victoria was not with him. He signed the documents with a flourish of his pen, a man trying to pretend he was in control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond him. Once his signature was on the page, Anton signed for the buyer. A lawyer nodded. The deal was done. The island was hers. Haley felt no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound quiet and deeply satisfying sense of completion. It was a transaction. A problem had been solved. A debt had been settled. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at Lake Geneva. The first phase of her plan was complete. Now it was time to prepare the stage. She picked up her phone and dialed her new estate manager, a woman hand-picked for her discretion and impeccable taste. "Good morning, Catherine Haley," said her voice, calm and steady. "We can now begin the renovations on the island. I have the guest list for the grand reopening party. I want the invitations sent out by the end of the week. Oh, and Catherine. The new owner wishes to remain anonymous for now. All correspondence should be from GM Enterprises." She hung up the phone. GM Haley Monroe, a name Sebastian Devereux would not recognize. But soon he would. He and everyone else who had watched her fall would be invited back to the scene of the crime. Only this time she wouldn't be the spectacle. She would be the architect. The invitation arrived in a world that had moved on. 5 years is an eternity in the sphere of the ultra-rich. Fortunes are made. Empires crumble. Alliances shift. For Sebastian and Victoria Devereux. The past 5 years had been a slow, grinding descent. The sale of the island had provided a temporary reprieve, but it was like using a teacup to bail out a sinking ship. Ethelred was a shadow of its former self, propped up by risky loans and the sheer force of Sebastian's denial. Their social standing, once unassailable, had become precarious. They were no longer the power couple everyone clamored to be near. They were the couple people whispered about their troubles a source of delicious gossip. Their marriage, born of ambition and betrayal, had curdled into a partnership of mutual resentment, held together only by a shared fear of losing their status. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a private courier. It was a heavy, cream-colored card, thick as a book cover, with minimalist, embossed gold lettering. There was no gaudy crest, no ostentatious design. Its power lay in its understated elegance. GM Enterprises cordially invites you to celebrate the reawakening of Kalivigny Island. A weekend of tranquility and new beginnings. The date was set for a month away. The details were sparse, promising private jet transport from select global capitals and an experience of unparalleled bespoke luxury. The host was identified only as the island's new anonymous owner. Victoria, her face a carefully maintained mask of cosmetic enhancements, turned the card over in her hands. GM. Enterprises, who the hell is that? Must be some new Russian oligarch or a Saudi prince. Tacky to be so mysterious. Sebastian, however, felt a flicker of something else. Not excitement, but a gnawing curiosity mixed with the bitter tang of loss. Everyone is talking about it, he said, scrolling through his phone. The entire guest list from that night. They all got at one. It's a power play. The new owner is making a statement inviting the old king's court to see the new regime. So we're not going, Victoria stated flatly. The island held nothing but sour memories for her, now a monument to a victory that had ultimately felt hollow. We have to go, Sebastian countered, his voice sharp. Not going would be an admission of defeat. It would be telling the world that we can't stand to see someone else own our old property. It would be weak. We will go, we will smile, we will praise the new owner's taste, and we will act as if selling that rock was the smartest decision we ever made. We have to maintain appearances, Victoria. It's all we have left. And so they accepted, as did everyone else. The mystery was too tantalizing to ignore. For the next month, the sole topic of conversation in their elite circles was the identity of GM. On the appointed day, Sebastian and Victoria boarded a chartered jet, a far cry from their old G650. The other passengers were familiar faces from their past, the same hedge fund managers, socialites, and tech moguls. But the atmosphere was different. The fawning respect they once commanded was gone, replaced by a polite, cool distance. They were no longer the sun around which these people orbited. They were just two more guests. As the jet descended towards the familiar airstrip, Sebastian felt a pit in his stomach. The island looked different, more lush. The main residence, the overlook, had been subtly altered. The stark modernist lines he had favored were softened by cascades of vibrant bougainvillea. The architecture was the same, but the soul of the place felt new. They were greeted not by staff in starchy formal uniforms, but by hosts in elegant flowing linen. The atmosphere was not one of opulent servitude, but of relaxed, confident hospitality. There was no string quartet playing Vivaldi, but the sophisticated ambient tones of a modern electronic composer. Their bags were whisked away to their suite, a guest villa not the owner's residence they had once occupied. It was the very same suite where Haley had been sent after her public humiliation. The irony was so thick it was suffocating, though Sebastian was the only one who seemed to notice. That evening, the welcome reception was held on the main terrace. It mirrored the party from 5 years ago, yet it was an inversion of it. The garish ice sculpture was gone, replaced by a stunning piece of modern art. The food was not a buffet of excess, but a curated selection of exquisite, locally sourced tapas. Everything was better, more tasteful, more confident, more powerful. Sebastian felt a growing sense of unease. This wasn't the work of some new money brute. This was the work of someone with impeccable taste and a deep understanding of psychology. Someone who knew exactly what this place once represented and was systematically dismantling it. He and Victoria mingled, putting on their brave faces, but the whispers were everywhere. "Who is GM? Have you seen the new art collection? I heard they bought the island for cash, no financing." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the assembled guests, A woman, the estate manager Catherine, stepped onto a small, discreet stage. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome," she said, her voice amplified just enough to be heard over the gentle music. "On behalf of our host, we are so thrilled you could join us for this special weekend." In a few moments, the owner of this island, the visionary behind GM Enterprises, would like to say a few words. A buzz of anticipation went through the crowd. Everyone craned their necks, looking towards the main entrance of the villa. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. He needed to see the person who had done this, the person who had bought his past and so effortlessly improved upon it. The music softened. The lights on the terrace dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the empty stage. The moment was pregnant with expectation, and from the shadows of the grand archway, a figure emerged. A woman. She was tall and poised, wearing a simple but exquisitely cut evening gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair was pulled back, accentuating a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly new. It was a face sculpted by strength, intelligence, and an unshakable, chilling calm. A collective audible gasp rippled through the guests. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone terrace. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face. His heart stopped. He was looking at a ghost. But she was not a ghost. She was real. It was Haley. She walked to the center of the stage, her movements possessing a liquid grace that was utterly captivating. The sapphire dress, a column of midnight silk, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making her the undeniable focal point of the entire terrace. She didn't look angry or triumphant or vengeful. She looked serene, a queen, taking her place on her throne not by conquest but by divine right. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back radiating a confidence that was so absolute it felt like a physical force. This was not the gentle, accommodating Haley they remembered. This was a woman forged in a fire they couldn't possibly comprehend. A staff member offered her a microphone, but she waited a long, deliberate moment before taking it, letting the silence and the crushing weight of the crowd's shock settle over the terrace. Her eyes, cool and analytical, swept across the sea of stunned, upturned faces. They passed over tech moguls who had once ignored her and socialites who had whispered about her. Finally, her gaze landed on Sebastian and Victoria. She held their stare for a single protracted heartbeat, a moment stretched into an eternity. In that silent, chilling acknowledgement, they knew, with bone-deep certainty, that this was not a coincidence. This was not a chance encounter. This was an appointment, an execution meticulously planned and 5 years in the making. Victoria's manicured fingers tightened on the stem of her wine glass, the crystal groaning under the pressure. Beside her, Sebastian stood utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief carved from ice. The man who always had a plan, always had an angle, was completely, terrifyingly adrift. His mind, usually a supersonic calculator of risk and opportunity, was blank with static. Impossible. It's not her. It's a trick, a ghost. But his heart, hammering against his ribs, knew the truth. "Welcome back to Calavigny Island," Haley finally said. Her voice was not the soft, hesitant tone he remembered. It was richer, deeper, and resonated with an unshakable authority that commanded the attention of every person present. "I see some familiar faces. It's been 5 years. A great deal can change in 5 years." She paused, allowing the profound understatement to land with the force of a physical blow. The whispers began to erupt, a panicked, sibilant sound like dry leaves, skittering across pavement. It's her. My God. It's actually her. How is this possible? Where did she get the money? Sebastian could feel the collective gaze of the crowd shift, flickering between the woman on the stage and him. He was no longer a guest. He was part of the spectacle. The other half of a story, whose ending he had written long ago, only to find the protagonist had returned to pen a final, brutal chapter. Some of you may remember me, she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of supreme, untouchable control, though perhaps in a different context. The last time we were all gathered here on a rather stormy evening, I was the wife of the host. Tonight, she let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool. I am simply the host. The implication was a thunderclap. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. The wine glass, forgotten in her hand, slipped from her nerveless fingers. It did not shatter on the stone terrace. It landed on the manicured lawn, just beside it, with a dull, muffled thud, a sound of anticlimax that was somehow more unnerving than a crash. I understand there is some curiosity, Haley said, her voice smoothly overriding the rising clamor. Let me be clear. This weekend is not about dwelling on the past. It is about building the future. It is about celebrating new beginnings. Her eyes swept the horizon towards the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. This island, once a symbol of brittle, fleeting power, a monument to an ego, is being reborn. It will now be the headquarters for my foundation, a sanctuary dedicated to supporting emerging artists and entrepreneurs who value creativity over currency. She was rewriting history, erasing his legacy with a few effortless sentences and replacing it with her own nobler vision. Every word was a calculated demolition of the world he had built. He had used the island to project strength. She was using it to project purpose. The comparison was devastating, and he could feel the judgment of his peers turning on him. However, she added, and her tone shifted, the philanthropic warmth evaporating, replaced by the chilling precision of a boardroom executioner. New beginnings sometimes require the clearing of old debts, and in the world of business, as we all know, all debts must eventually be paid. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Sebastian's. He felt pinned by her gaze, a specimen under a microscope. For instance, Haley said, her voice now a clinical, dispassionate instrument. Some of you here tonight are investors in a company called Ethelred. My advice as a courtesy from your host would be to divest immediately. Their recent financing, the series of high-risk loans that have been keeping them afloat for the past 6 months, were not from a traditional banking institution. They were extended by a private equity firm, a rather aggressive firm named Orion Capital. A new wave of murmurs, this time laced with genuine financial panic, rippled through the guests. Several people, no longer trying to be discreet, pulled out their phones and began typing furiously. The name Orion Capital meant nothing to them, but the warning from the woman who clearly held all the cards was enough. But to Sebastian, the name was a death knell. Orion Capital was his lifeline, his secret savior, the anonymous entity that had given him the capital to stave off ruin. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in his stomach as he began to connect the impossible dots. Haley let him squirm in that silent horror for a moment, before continuing. Orion Capital, as of last week, was acquired in a rather swift, hostile takeover by my own holding company, which means, Sebastian, that the 9-figure debt you thought you owed to a stranger you now owe to me." The crowd gasped as one. This was beyond revenge. This was a strategic masterwork of such breathtaking cruelty that it bordered on art. "I'm calling in the loan," she stated as simply as if she were ordering a coffee. "All of it. The covenants in your agreement are rather strict, as desperate men tend to overlook the fine print. I believe the default clause can be triggered by me at my sole discretion, and I am exercising that discretion. Effective tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m. Zurich time, your company will be in receivership. My people will be at your offices to oversee the liquidation." Sebastian actually staggered a step back, his hand flying to a nearby pillar for support. This was it. The end. Not just failure, but total annihilation delivered publicly by the woman he had tried to erase. Haley's gaze then shifted with chilling nonchalance to Victoria. "And Victoria, your new lifestyle brand, a noble effort to remain relevant. Unfortunately, your primary seed investor, a small venture capital fund called Beaumont Ventures, has also just been acquired by a subsidiary of GM Enterprises. We will be re-evaluating all current investments, and I'm afraid a vanity project with no discernible path to profitability does not align with our portfolio strategy. Your funding will be terminated effective immediately." If Sebastian's ruin was a cannon blast, Victoria's was the silent, deadly slice of a stiletto. Her carefully constructed world of influence and appearances evaporated in an instant. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, taut mask of shock and hatred. Having delivered her financial death blows, Haley's expression softened, but it was a change that brought no comfort. It was the prelude to the final, most personal devastation. But as I said, she repeated her voice now imbued with a quiet power. "Tonight is about the future." From the shadows at the side of the stage, a door to the main residence opened. The estate manager, Catherine, emerged holding the hand of a small boy, no older than 5. He was dressed in a simple white linen shirt and trousers, his dark hair neatly combed. He walked with a child's unself-conscious curiosity, his eyes taking in the strange crowd. He walked straight to Haley, who knelt down, her entire being softening as she wrapped a protective arm around him. "I would like you all to meet the true owner of this island's future," she said, her voice thick with a love that was a tangible, fiercely protective force. "This is my son, Leo." Leo looked out at the crowd, his gaze unafraid. He had his mother's thoughtful eyes, but everything else, the dark, unruly hair, the strong set of his jaw, the determined shape of his chin, was pure, undiluted Devereaux. He was the spitting image of a younger, uncorrupted Sebastian. The paternity he had so publicly and callously questioned 5 years ago was now presented as irrefutable evidence to the very same jury that had witnessed his crime. The silence on the terrace was absolute, profound. It was the silence of a tomb. The social and emotional checkmate was complete. Every lie Sebastian had ever told about her, about their child, was laid bare for all to see. Haley stood up, holding her son's hand firmly in hers. She didn't spare another glance for the wreckage she had wrought. She didn't need to gloat or scream. Her victory was in her calm, in her control, in the simple, undeniable fact that she was standing there, whole and powerful with her son by her side. She looked at Sebastian one last time, and there was nothing in her eyes. Not hatred, not pity, not even the memory of love. It was the flat, dismissive look one gives to a piece of furniture, to something utterly irrelevant that is about to be removed. "Enjoy the party," she said to the assembled guests, her voice once again the gracious host. Then she turned her back on her former husband, on the woman who had replaced her, and on the entire life that had almost destroyed her. She walked off the stage with her son, disappearing back into the magnificent home that was now hers, leaving everyone else standing in the beautiful, perfect, and utterly ruthless world she had created. The party's ambient music swelled to fill the silence, but it couldn't hide the sound of a world ending for the two figures left standing alone in the center of it all. That night, Haley Monroe didn't just reclaim her name. She forged a new legend. Her story became a whisper, then a roar in the circles of the powerful, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the castles you build, but the ashes you rise from. She transformed Kalavinni Island from a monument of ego into a beacon of hope, proving that the deepest betrayals can fuel the most incredible transformations. Her revenge wasn't loud or explosive. It was the quiet, undeniable hum of a new empire being built upon the foundations of an old one's collapse. She became the architect of her own destiny, the queen of her own island, and a mother who showed her son that a person's worth is not determined by who tried to break them, but by how they choose to rebuild. What did you think of Haley's ultimate comeback? Was her justice served cold, or was it just right? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had a moment where you had to rise from the ashes, share your story of strength. We are inspired by resilience. For more stories of incredible twists and ultimate triumph, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more compelling stories like this to you. The first thing you hear is the sound that becomes your entire world, the steady rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It's a metronome counting down the seconds of a life suspended in limbo. For Eleanor Vance, lying paralyzed in an ICU bed, it was the only proof she still existed. But then two other sounds pierced the sterile fog voices. One was her husband, Richard, a voice that once promised forever. The other belonged to a younger woman. They weren't whispering words of comfort. They were laughing at her expense over her comatose body, planning a future built upon her grave. They thought she was a ghost already. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The world for Eleanor Vance had shrunk to the space between beeps. Beep. An inhale she couldn't control. Beep. An exhale she couldn't feel. Beep. The pulse in her own ears a faint drum against the symphony of machines that were living for her. She was floating in a thick grey abyss, a prisoner in the derelict vessel of her own body. A car accident, they'd told her, during a fleeting moment of lucidity. A truck had run a red light. That's all she remembered before the darkness swallowed her whole. Now the darkness had company. Look at her. Richie. A lilting saccharine voice whispered a sound as cloying as cheap perfume in the sterile antiseptic air of the ICU. She just lies there. It's creepy. That was Chloe Decker, Richard's protégé at Sterling Properties, a girl barely 25 with ambition that burned brighter than her bleached blonde hair. Eleanor had seen the way Chloe looked at her husband, a predatory gleam disguised as admiration. She had seen the way Richard's hand lingered on Chloe's back for a moment too long during company galas. She had known in the way a woman always knows, but had chosen the quiet dignity of denial. Richard's voice, a low baritone that once soothed her to sleep, was now laced with an impatient, cruel amusement. The doctors say it's a miracle she's alive at all. Significant brain trauma. They don't know if she'll ever wake up. Even if she does, she'll probably be a vegetable. More work for me. He sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by a tragedy he was secretly celebrating. A wave of impotent rage, cold and sharp, washed over Eleanor. Vegetable, I can hear you, you bastard. I can hear every treacherous word. But her lips wouldn't move. Her eyelids were leaden shutters. She was buried alive. Chloe made a soft, cooing sound. Oh, you poor thing, having to deal with all this. And right before the Kensington Tower deal is about to close, there was a rustle of fabric, the squeak of a leather chair. He was sitting down. Chloe, she imagined, was perched on the arm of his chair, or maybe even his lap. The thought was a physical blow. Is everything, going to be okay with the financing? With her being like this? Don't you worry your pretty little head about that. Richard chuckled. His voice was closer now, right beside her ear. She could smell his cologne, the expensive sandalwood scent she'd bought him for their anniversary. It smelled like betrayal. Everything is in my name. Well, our names jointly. But as her husband, with her incapacitated, I have full control. Power of attorney. It's one of the perks of marriage, I suppose. I sign the money moves. The Kensington deal will make us legends, Chloe. And once she's gone, it will all be ours. Ours. The word was a dagger twisting in a wound she couldn't show. Her entire life with Richard flashed through her mind. She had been a brilliant corporate lawyer at Pierce & Lyle in Chicago on the fast track to a senior partnership. Then she met Richard Sterling, a charming, ambitious real estate developer with dreams that stretched as high as the skyscrapers he wanted to build. He'd courted her with a relentless passion, convincing her that his dreams were their dreams. He'd told her he needed her mind, her legal acumen, not in an office tower downtown, but by his side, helping him build his empire. So she'd quit. She'd traded her corner office for a role as his unpaid advisor, his strategist, his wife. She had structured his deals, vetted his contracts, and built the legal framework for Sterling Properties, making it an impenetrable fortress. And she had done it all for love. For him. What if she doesn't die? Chloe's voice was a nervous whisper. What if she just stays like this forever? Hooked up to these horrible machines. There was a pause. The beeping of the monitor seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. Eleanor felt a cold dread snake its way through her paralysis. Then we'll have to make a decision, Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that was more terrifying than any shout. Dr. Peterson says it will eventually come down to quality of life. As her loving husband, I'll have to make the hard choice. To let her go peacefully. It's what she would have wanted. He stroked her hair. The touch was grotesque, a spider crawling on her skin. She wanted to scream, to recoil, to claw his hypocritical hands away from her. You won't get the chance, a voice screamed inside her head. A part of her she thought had long been dormant. The sharp, analytical mind of Eleanor Vance, Esquire, began to stir. Chloe giggled a horrid, tinny sound. You think of everything, Richie. You're so smart. She lowered her voice, thinking she was being discreet. Is the nurse gone? I've missed you. The sound of a kiss, wet and obscene, echoed in the silent room. It was followed by Richard's smug murmur. "Patience, kitten. A few more days. We have to keep up appearances. The grieving husband. Once the deal is closed and the doctors give me the final nod, our new life begins. We'll buy that penthouse overlooking the park. We'll take the yacht to Monaco. Everything she has, everything we built, will be the foundation of our happiness." They continued to talk, their voices a venomous drone, outlining the future they were planning to build on her ashes. They mocked her taste in art, the charities she supported, even the way she organized the kitchen. Each word was a fresh insult, a new layer of humiliation. Eleanor absorbed it all. She let their cruelty soak into her, not as a poison, but as fuel. The grey fog in her mind began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. Richard thought he had full control. He thought her name on the accounts was a mere formality. He had always dismissed her legal structuring as Ellie's little hobby too complex for his big-picture mind. He had signed every document she put in front of him for 15 years, without reading a single clause, trusting her to protect his interests. He had never once considered that she was protecting her own. As they finally rose to leave, Richard leaned over her one last time. "Sleep well, darling," he whispered, his breath hot on her cheek. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." He and Chloe walked out, their laughter echoing faintly down the hallway. The door clicked shut, leaving Eleanor alone again, with the steady, rhythmic beep. But now the sound was different. It was no longer a countdown to her end. It was the ticking of a clock. And Richard's time was running out. She just needed to wake up. 15 years earlier, the world was a canvas of boundless opportunity for Eleanor Vance and Richard Sterling. Their Chicago apartment, though, modest, buzzed with an electric energy filled with architectural blueprints, spread across the dining table, and legal pads covered in Eleanor's precise, elegant script. He was the dreamer. She was the architect, not of buildings, but of the very foundation they stood upon. Eleanor had just made junior partner at Pierce & Lyle. She was known for her unyielding diligence and an almost psychic ability to find loopholes and craft ironclad contracts. She loved the intellectual combat of corporate law, the thrill of outmaneuvering an opponent on the pages of a complex merger agreement. Then came Richard, a force of nature with a dazzling smile and a vision for reshaping the Chicago skyline. He saw in her not just a beautiful woman, but a strategic weapon. "Ellie, you're wasted there," he'd told her one night, gesturing passionately towards the city lights from their balcony. "You're making old men richer. With me, with us, we can build something that lasts, something with our name on it. I have the vision, you have the brains to make it bulletproof. We're a perfect team." His ambition was a drug, and she became willingly addicted. The decision to leave her firm was agonizing, a severing of an identity she had meticulously built. But looking at Richard, she saw a shared future so bright it blinded her to the sacrifices she was making. So she took the leap. Her first task was to structure their assets. Richard had a small inheritance and a great deal of debt. He was a brilliant salesman, but a reckless financial planner. He saw money as a tool for the present, not an asset to be protected for the future. Eleanor saw things differently. She saw risk everywhere. Market downturns, predatory partners' lawsuits, and the unpredictable frailties of human relationships. "We need to set up a holding company." "Richard," she explained one evening, sliding a diagram across the table. "A master trust. We'll call it E&R Sterling Holdings. Terms and all assets, all properties. Every share of stock will be owned by the trust, not by us as individuals. It's a shield. It protects our personal assets from any business liabilities. Richard had waved a dismissive hand, more interested in a new design for a cantilevered balcony. Sounds complicated. Just do whatever you think is best, legal eagle. That's why I have you. He'd winked, patted her on the head, as if she were a clever pet, and went back to his drawings. That condescension, though playful at the time, planted a tiny, cold seed of doubt in Eleanor's mind. It was the first inkling that he saw her contribution not as a partnership, but as a service. Still, she pushed the feeling aside and got to work. She created the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust with a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses that would make a tax attorney weep with admiration. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. She was the settler, and they were co-trustees. As long as they were together and functioning, they had equal control. But Eleanor, ever the strategist, planned for every contingency. She embedded a series of triggers within the trust's charter tripwires that would shift the balance of power under specific extreme circumstances. She remembered the day she drafted the most critical one. It had been raining a gloomy Tuesday. Richard had just come home, buzzing about a potential investor, but he'd also been careless with his words, making a joke about a friend who'd been taken to the cleaners in a divorce. "You'd never do that to me, though, would you, Ellie?" He'd laughed. Of course not. She'd smiled back, her heart a little colder than it was a moment before. That night she drafted Clause 11, Section B. She called it the Incapacitation and Fiduciary Duty Clause. It was her secret fail-safe. The clause stipulated that in the event one trustee became medically incapacitated as certified by 2 attending physicians, the other trustee would assume sole unilateral control of all assets within the holding. This was standard, but Eleanor added a unique, vicious little twist. Her addendum subsection 2 stated that this transfer of power would be irrevocable if, during the period of incapacitation, the acting trustee was found to be engaging in actions that constituted a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. What defined such a breach? The clause was deliberately brilliantly vague, referencing actions demonstrating gross negligence, infidelity, or intent to cause financial or personal harm to the incapacitated party. Crucially, the activation of this subsection didn't require a court of law. It required only a formal attestation submitted by a legal representative of the incapacitated trustee, along with what the document termed credible supporting evidence. The evidence could be a recording, a sworn affidavit from a witness, or financial records. Upon submission to the trust's designated financial institutions, all control, all accounts, all properties, and all voting rights would be immediately and permanently transferred to a new secondary trust. This secondary trust was her true masterstroke. It was named the Vance Legacy Trust. She was the sole beneficiary and trustee. It was a ghost entity existing only on Napa, in a file in her personal safe, its charter lodged with the bank's most senior trust officer, a man who owed his career to a tip Eleanor had once given him. When she'd finished drafting it, her hands were trembling. It felt like a betrayal of the love she felt for Richard. It was a preemptive strike against a war she hoped would never come. "What's all this?" Richard had asked, picking up the thick document a week later, ready for his signature. "It's the final charter for the holding company," she'd said, her voice calm and even. "It's just standard boilerplate. Protects us from everything. I've put signatory flags on all the pages you need to sign." He'd hefted its weight. "God, you lawyers love your paperwork." He hadn't read a single word. He'd simply flipped through the pages, scrawling his bold, arrogant signature, Richard Sterling, wherever a yellow flag pointed. He was signing his own death warrant and applauding her for her thoroughness. Over the years, the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust grew into a behemoth. It held their penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, the vacation home in Aspen, a portfolio of stocks worth tens of millions, and most importantly, the controlling interest in Sterling Properties, the engine of their wealth. Richard, the face of the company, grew more arrogant with each new building that clawed its way into the sky. He forgot that the real power wasn't in the steel and glass he erected, but in the paper and ink she had so carefully arranged. He saw the fortress and thought it was his. He never realized he was just a guest, and she was the one who held every key to every door. Lying in her ICU bed, the memory of that rainy Tuesday returned to her with perfect clarity. The condescending pat on the head, his careless signature on the page, his laughter. He had called her his legal eagle. He was about to find out just how sharp her talons were. Days bled into one another in a monotonous cycle of beeps, hushed medical jargon, and the sponge bath at dawn. For Eleanor, it was a period of intense, silent focus. While her body lay inert, her mind was a whirlwind of activity, rereading every line of the trust charter, planning her moves like a grand master, envisioning a chess game 20 steps ahead. The first and most critical step was communication. She had to reach him. She had to reach Benjamin Carter. Benjamin was more than her former law partner. He was the closest thing she had to a brother. They had started as ambitious associates at Pierce & Lyle together, spending late nights fueled by coffee and a shared passion for the elegant intricacies of the law. He was the only one who had truly understood what she was giving up to join Richard. "Just make sure you're fireproof, Elle," he had warned her, his expression serious. Men like Sterling. They build empires, but they burn a lot of bridges. Don't let yourself be one of them. He was the only other person on Earth who knew about the Vance Legacy Trust. He had been its legal witness. His signature was there right next to hers. Her daily visitor was a nurse named Maria. She was in her late 50s with kind eyes and hands that were gentle, yet efficient. Unlike the other staff who treated Eleanor like a piece of medical equipment, Maria spoke to her. She would recount stories about her grandchildren, comment on the weather, or read passages from a novel she was enjoying. She did it without any expectation of a response, a simple act of human connection. It was during one of Maria's visits that Eleanor felt it a twitch, a tiny infinitesimal flicker of a nerve in her right index finger. It was a spark in the void, a signal from a distant shore. She focused all her will, all her mental energy on that one finger. The effort was Herculean, like trying to lift a mountain. The muscles atrophied from disuse resisted. But her mind, honed by years of legal battles, was relentless. Move. Nothing. Move. A tremor. Maria was adjusting her IV drip, her back to Eleanor. "The doctor says your vitals are getting stronger, dear," she said cheerfully. "That's a good sign. We're all rooting for you." Eleanor ignored the words, focusing only on the signal from her brain to her hand. She pictured the nerve endings firing the electrical impulse traveling down her arm. The image of Richard and Chloe kissing in this very room flashed in her mind, and a surge of adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded her system. The finger twitched again, more noticeably this time. She waited until Maria turned back towards her. The nurse was checking the readout on the heart monitor. Now was the time. Eleanor poured every ounce of her being into the effort. Her finger curled just slightly, then straightened. It was a clumsy, spastic movement, but it was real. Maria's eyes widened. She slowly looked from the monitor to Eleanor's hand. She froze. Did you just do that?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Eleanor did it again. A curl, a twitch, tears welled in Maria's eyes. She rushed out of the room, her voice echoing down the hall. "Dr. Rossi. Get in here. Now." Dr. Isabella Rossi was a sharp, no-nonsense neurologist who had been overseeing Eleanor's case. She came in followed by Maria, her expression skeptical but hopeful. "What is it, Maria?" Her hand. She moved her finger. "I saw it," Maria insisted. Dr. Rossi came to the bedside and took Eleanor's hand. "Mrs. Sterling." "Eleanor. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." Eleanor focused. The doctor's hand felt warm, a tangible link to the world she was fighting to rejoin. She pictured Richard's smug face, heard his condescending whisper, "I'll take care of everything." The rage gave her strength. She squeezed. It was faint, a mere flutter of pressure, but it was undeniable. Dr. Rossi's professional demeanor melted away for a second, replaced by a genuine, brilliant smile. "Well, I'll be. Welcome back, Mrs. Sterling." Over the next 2 days, progress was slow but steady. Eleanor could now squeeze on command, and she had regained a small amount of movement in her eyelids. She could flutter them, not yet open them, but it was a start. It was communication. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. They established a system. Richard's visits continued a grotesque pantomime of grief. He would hold her unresponsive hand, the same hand that was now plotting his ruin, and speak to her in sorrowful tones for the benefit of the nursing staff. "I'm right here, darling. Fighting for you," he'd say, before immediately turning his attention to his phone, barking orders about the Kensington deal. He had no idea the vegetable in the bed was watching his every move through barely parted eyelids. The moment she had been waiting for came on a Thursday afternoon. Richard was out meeting with investors. Dr. Rossi was making her rounds. Maria was by her side. "You're showing remarkable progress, Eleanor, Doctor," Rossi said, making notes on a chart. "We're seeing more activity in the frontal lobe. Your cognitive functions seem to be intact. It's just a matter of the brain re-establishing connections with the body." This was her chance. Using their established code, she began to flutter her eyelids insistently. Maria noticed first. "Doctor, she wants something." Dr. Rossi leaned in. "Eleanor, what is it?" 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. Are you in pain? 2 squeezes. Faint but firm. Do you need something? Water. 2 squeezes. They went through a list of possibilities. After several frustrating minutes, Maria had an idea. "Is it about a person? Do you want to see someone?" 1 powerful squeeze. The effort sent a jolt through her arm. "Your husband?" Dr. Rossi asked. A violent, unmistakable series of 2 squeezes. "No, no, no." Dr. Rossi and Maria exchanged a look. "Someone else, then," Maria said gently. "Can you spell the name?" She began to go through the alphabet, a slow, painstaking process. A B. When she got to B, Eleanor gave a strong squeeze. Then for E. Then N. It took nearly 20 agonizing minutes, but finally the name was spelled out. B-E-N. Ben. Dr. Rossi looked puzzled. "Is Ben a family member?" 2 squeezes. A friend. 1 squeeze. Eleanor then fluttered her eyelids again, a signal she had devised for urgent. She had to convey more. She needed a pen. She needed a word. Maria, seeming to understand the desperation, had a flash of inspiration. Doctor, maybe. Maybe we could try facilitated communication. I could hold her hand with a pen. It was an unconventional idea, but Dr. Rossi, intrigued by Eleanor's fierce determination, agreed. Maria gently placed a pen in Eleanor's limp hand, wrapping her own around it to support the weight. She held a notepad beneath it. "Okay, Eleanor," Maria said softly. "Guide my hand. Just tell me where to go." The pen felt alien, a clumsy extension of a will that was still disconnected from the body. But Eleanor focused, channeling the image of the word into her mind. It was the key, the trigger, the one word only Ben would understand. She guided Maria's hand in a series of shaky, almost illegible scrawls. The letters were misshapen, the lines wobbly, but after a few minutes, a word was there on the page. Fireproof. Dr. Rossi looked at the paper, then at Eleanor. Fireproof. Eleanor gave one final exhausted squeeze. "Yes. And you want us to call Ben?" Dr. Rossi confirmed. "Yes. We'll need a full name and number." That was the next hurdle. But Maria, ever resourceful, remembered seeing a list of emergency contacts in Eleanor's admission file. She retrieved it. "There are a few Bens here. Benjamin Scott, Benjamin Riley. Here, Benjamin Carter. Is that him?" The squeeze she gave in response was the strongest one yet. It was a declaration. The game had begun. Dr. Rossi made the call. Her voice professionally neutral, as she explained that her patient, Mrs. Sterling, was showing signs of consciousness and was asking for him. Eleanor let her head fall back against the pillow, the exhaustion absolute. She had fired the first shot. The architect had sent the signal. Now it was up to her ally to bring the walls of the fortress crashing down on its arrogant king. Benjamin Carter was in the middle of a deposition when his personal cell phone rang. He normally ignored it during proceedings, but the caller ID was Chicago General Hospital. His heart clenched. He excused himself immediately, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He'd been calling the hospital twice a day for updates on Eleanor, getting the same vague, grim report. He feared the worst. "This is Benjamin Carter. Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Isabella Rossi from Chicago General. I'm calling about Eleanor Vance Sterling. Is she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She's awake, Mr. Carter." "Well, partially. Her cognitive function appears to be returning, but she has very limited motor control. She asked for you." Relief washed over him, so intensely his knees felt weak. "She asked for me." "How?" "It's a long story, but she was very insistent. She also communicated a word. She wanted me to tell it to you. The word is fireproof." Benjamin froze. The air in the hallway outside the conference room suddenly felt thin. Fireproof. It was their code, a private joke from 2 decades ago that had morphed into a solemn promise. It was the word they'd used when he witnessed the Vance Legacy Trust documents. "This is my fireproof vest, Ben," she had told him, "just in case I ever get caught in the blaze." Her telling him that word now could only mean one thing: the fire was here. And Richard had started it. "I understand," Benjamin said, his voice now cold and clipped, the friendly lawyer replaced by a predator. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll be there this evening. Please do not mention my impending visit to her husband, Mr. Sterling. Is that understood?" "Perfectly." Mr. Carter, Dr. Rossi replied, a hint of complicity in her tone. Benjamin hung up and walked back into the conference room. "My apologies, gentlemen," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "A critical emergency has arisen. We'll have to reschedule." He was out the door before anyone could object. He didn't go to the hospital first. He went to his office. He unlocked the top drawer of his private filing cabinet, a place no one else had a key to, and retrieved a thick navy blue binder. The cover simply read, "Vance Legacy. Contingency." He then made a call to a private investigator he kept on retainer, a former police detective named Frank Miller. "Frank, it's Ben Carter. I have a job for you. Priority Alpha. I need discreet 24/7 surveillance on two individuals, Richard Sterling and a woman named Chloe Decker, an employee at his company. I want everything. Who they meet, where they go, and especially their interactions at Chicago General Hospital. I have a strong suspicion of a breach of fiduciary duty. Get me something credible, Frank, and get it yesterday." His next call was to David Chen, the Senior Vice President of Trusts and Estates at Northern Merchants Bank, the institution that held the vast Sterling fortune. He and Chen had a long-standing professional relationship. "David Benjamin Carter, I'm invoking a contingency clause on the ENR Sterling Holdings Trust account number, ending in 771. I will be in your office at 9:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow with the necessary documentation. I need you and your legal team present. No advance notice is to be given to either of the current trustees." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "Ben, that's one of our biggest accounts. Invoking a clause like that without notifying the trustees, it's highly irregular. The circumstances are highly irregular, David," Benjamin said, his tone steely. "The Charter allows for it. Read Clause 11 Section B, Subsection 2. You'll find I'm well within my rights as the designated legal representative. 9:00 a.m. He hung up. That evening he visited the hospital. He found Eleanor just as the doctor had described. Her eyes were open, and they tracked him as he entered the room. The fierce intelligence in them was unmistakable. He sat by her bed and took her hand. "I got your message, Elle," he whispered. "Fireproof. The plan is in motion. I just need one thing from you. The evidence." Using the laborious yes or no squeezing system, she told him everything. She described the conversation between Richard and Chloe, quoting their cruelest words verbatim. She told him about their plans for the money, for her life, for the future they were stealing. Benjamin listened, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. This wasn't just a marital dispute. It was a conspiracy born of breathtaking cruelty. "Is there a witness?" he asked. "A nurse? A doctor?" She squeezed twice. "No." They were alone. "Damn it," he muttered. It was her word against his, and she was in no position to testify. But then he remembered Frank. His phone buzzed an hour later. It was Frank. "You're not going to believe this, Ben. Your boy Sterling and the blonde Decker. They're not exactly subtle. I followed them from the hospital to a restaurant downtown, sat 2 tables away, put my phone on the table recording audio. It's not great quality, but it's damning. He's toasting to the imminent closing of the Kensington deal and their new beginning. He talks about his wife's tragic decline and how he'll soon be unburdened. It's all here." Benjamin felt a grim satisfaction. It was enough. It was the credible supporting evidence the clause required. He asked Frank to have the time-stamped audio file emailed to him immediately, along with a sworn affidavit of how and when it was obtained. The next morning at precisely 8:55 a.m., Benjamin Carter, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, walked into the hushed, marble-floored offices of Northern Merchants Bank. He was calm, his movements precise. He was a lion entering an arena ready for the kill. He was escorted to a large boardroom where David Chen and two of the bank's top lawyers were waiting, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Stacks of documents related to the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust were piled on the polished mahogany table. "Good morning, gentlemen," Benjamin said, placing his leather briefcase on the table and clicking it open. He didn't sit. He preferred to stand to command the room. "Ben, this is highly unusual," the bank's lead counsel, a man named Harris, began. "Mr. Sterling is one of our most valued clients. Mr. Sterling's status is about to change," Benjamin replied coolly. He pulled out the navy blue binder. "This is the charter for a secondary dormant trust, the Vance Legacy Trust. As per the instructions filed with this bank 15 years ago, it is to be activated upon the triggering of Clause 11B2 of the primary trust." He then laid out his case with surgical precision. He presented Dr. Rossi's signed medical assessment of Eleanor's incapacitation, fulfilling the first condition of the clause. Then he presented Frank Miller's sworn affidavit. Finally, he took a small digital audio player from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "is Mr. Sterling, in his own words from last night, discussing his plans to benefit financially from his wife's imminent death, a death he himself seems prepared to facilitate. This constitutes, I believe, a textbook breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty." He pressed play. Richard's smug, confident voice filled the silent boardroom. The lawyers listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally to grim understanding. The recording ended with the sound of Richard and Chloe clinking champagne glasses. Benjamin pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. "The charter is clear," Benjamin stated, his voice like ice. "Upon presentation of this evidence, all assets liquid and fixed, all shares, all properties held by E&R Sterling Holdings are to be transferred immediately and irrevocably to the Vance Legacy Trust. Eleanor Vance is the sole trustee and beneficiary. Richard Sterling is to be removed from every account. His access is to be revoked. His name is to be struck. As of this moment, he has no legal claim to a single dollar held by this bank." David Chen looked at his lawyers. Harris, the lead counsel, read the clause in the trust document one more time, his finger tracing the words Eleanor had written so long ago. He looked up at Benjamin, then at his colleague, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. The language was ironclad. There were no loopholes. They were legally, unequivocally bound to act. Harris let out a long, slow breath. "Mr. Carter, you've made your case. We will execute the transfer. It will be completed within the hour." Benjamin nodded, a flicker of grim triumph in his eyes. He snapped his briefcase shut. "Thank you for your cooperation, gentlemen. I'll be waiting for confirmation." He walked out of the bank and into the bright morning sunlight. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All that was left was for the wolf to walk into it. Richard Sterling woke up feeling like the master of the universe. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, glinting off the glass and steel of the city he felt he owned. Today was the day. The Kensington Tower deal. The largest of his career was closing. At 11 a.m., he was scheduled to wire a final 9-figure earnest money deposit to the sellers. By noon, the deal would be done, and his legacy would be cemented. He showered whistling a cheerful tune, He chose his most expensive suit, a custom-tailored Tom Ford, and a Swiss watch that cost more than most people's cars. He glanced at the framed photo of him and Eleanor on his bedside table, a relic from a happier time. A pang of something annoyance, not guilt, pricked at him. Her timing for this whole medical drama was incredibly inconvenient. Still, he mused it did simplify things. He sent a quick text to Chloe. "Today's the day, kitten. The future is ours. See you tonight to celebrate." He had a quick breakfast served by his housekeeper, and then sat down in his home office, a magnificent room with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. He logged into his Northern Merchants Bank business portal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He navigated to the wire transfer page, entered the staggering sum, the recipient's account details, and the authorization codes. He clicked Confirm. An error message appeared on the screen. Transaction declined, insufficient funds. Richard stared at it, baffled. Insufficient funds. That was impossible. The account held more than double the required amount. He tried again, thinking he'd made a typo. The same message appeared. Annoyance began to bubble in his chest. A technical glitch, no doubt. The bank's website was probably down for maintenance. He hated dealing with these little technological hiccups. It was beneath him. He picked up his phone and dialed his private banker, a man named Henderson he'd had on speed dial for years. "Richard, good morning, calling about the big day." Henderson's voice was obsequiously cheerful. "Henderson, your system is on the fritz," Richard snapped, his patience already wearing thin. "I'm trying to wire the Kensington deposit, and it's kicking it back. Says insufficient funds. Fix it. Now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched on for an uncomfortably long time. Richard?" Henderson's voice had lost its confident edge. It was now hesitant, nervous. I'm seeing something very unusual on my end. Your access to the ENR Holdings accounts appears to be restricted." "Restricted?" Richard barked out a laugh. "What are you talking about? I am ENR Holdings. It's my company, my money, unrestricted." "I can't, sir," Henderson stammered. "The directive came from the top, from our legal and trust division. As of 9:01 this morning, your signatory authority was revoked. The assets have been consolidated into a new trust." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young man on the verge of his first bankruptcy. "That's absurd. It's a mistake. Put me through to your legal department. Put me through to David Chen. Mr. Chen is in a meeting, sir. He left explicit instructions not to be disturbed. Sir, according to this, the new controlling entity is something called the Vance Legacy Trust. The sole trustee is Eleanor Vance Sterling." The name hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor. It was impossible. She was a vegetable, a shell. She couldn't sign her own name, let alone execute a complex financial coup. This had to be some colossal, insane misunderstanding. "Listen to me very carefully, Henderson." Richard said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "My wife is in a coma. She is medically incapacitated. I have power of attorney. Whatever paperwork you think you have is fraudulent. You are going to reverse this right now, or the first call I make will be to my lawyer to sue you, this bank, and every person involved into oblivion. Are we clear?" Mr. Sterling, the documentation we received was accompanied by a medical directive certifying Mrs. Sterling's condition, but it also invoked Clause 11B of your trust's charter. It was presented by her legal counsel, Benjamin Carter. It's all in order, sir. My hands are tied. I'm sorry. Benjamin Carter. The name ignited a firestorm of fury in Richard's mind. Eleanor's sanctimonious lawyer friend. This was his doing. He must have somehow forged her signature, cooked up this scheme to steal his money. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. The Kensington deal. The deposit was due in less than 2 hours. If he missed that wire, he would be in breach of contract. He'd lose the deal, forfeit the millions he'd already put down, and his reputation would be in tatters. His lenders, his partners, they would descend on him like sharks. He hung up on Henderson and immediately tried to use his corporate credit card to book a helicopter to fly him downtown. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. He pulled up his personal checking account, his walking around money. The balance was 0. She'd taken everything. Not just the business assets. Everything. The penthouse, the cars, the personal accounts. It had all been funneled through the master trust. He was locked out of his own life. He stormed through the penthouse, a gilded cage that was no longer his. He saw the art on the walls. Eleanor had chosen the furniture she had picked out. It all seemed to be mocking him. He was a king who had woken up to find his castle was made of cardboard and his crown was made of tin. He grabbed his car keys and sprinted to the garage, his mind racing. He had to get to the bank. He had to get to the hospital. He had to confront Carter and that bitch Eleanor. He would scream. He would threaten. He would force them to undo this. He jumped into his Bentley, a car he now realized he probably didn't even own anymore, and tore out of the garage, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He ran a red light, earning a blast from a taxi's horn. He didn't care. The carefully constructed facade of Richard Sterling, titan of industry, was crumbling around him, and all he could feel was a desperate, primal rage. He had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated his wife. He had seen a quiet, supportive partner and had been blind to the brilliant, ruthless lawyer who had always been lurking just beneath the surface. He had thought he was the predator. He was just now realizing he had been the prey all along. When Richard burst into the ICU, he was a storm of fury and entitlement. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was flushed, and his eyes were wild. He bypassed the nurse's station, ignoring their calls for him to stop, and slammed open the door to Eleanor's room. "What the hell have you done?" he roared, the sound utterly out of place in the hushed, sterile environment. But the scene that met him was not what he expected. The room was no longer just a sterile medical space. It was a command center. Benjamin Carter, looking impossibly calm, in a crisp suit, stood by the window. Dr. Rossi was present, holding a clipboard and looking on with a stern, protective expression. And in the bed, propped up by a wedge of pillows, was Eleanor. She was not the comatose victim he had last seen. Her eyes were open, clear and sharp as chips of ice. An IV was still taped to her arm, and her movements were slight, but the force of her presence filled the room. The fragile, broken woman was gone. In her place sat a queen on her chessboard, looking at a cornered king. "Richard," she said. Her voice was weak, raspy, from disuse, but it cut through his rage like a scalpel. "You're making a scene. You should lower your voice." He stared at her, momentarily stunned into silence by her lucidity. He turned his fury on Benjamin. "This is your doing, Carter? You cooked up this scheme, you forged her name." "There were no forgeries." "Richard," Benjamin said, his voice dangerously quiet, "everything was executed according to the letter of the law, a law that you incidentally signed off on. You should really read your contracts more carefully." Richard turned back to Eleanor, his face contorting with disbelief and rage. You can't do this. That money is mine. I built that company." "Did you?" Eleanor asked, her voice gaining a little more strength. "I seem to recall structuring the loans. I recall negotiating with the zoning boards. I recall writing the contracts that made your vision a reality. You were the face, Richard. I was the foundation, and you were careless enough to build your entire house on a foundation you didn't understand." She took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a cup a nurse held for her. "I heard you, you know. I heard everything. You and Chloe." Richard's face went pale. "I heard you calling me a vegetable." She continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "I heard you discussing my quality of life and how you'd have to make the hard choice to let me go. I heard you kissing her right there in that chair you're about to lean on. I heard you planning your trip to Monaco with my money. Each word was a perfectly aimed shot." Richard staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. He looked around the room at the doctor, at the nurse, at Benjamin. He saw no sympathy, only cold, hard judgment. He was exposed, his vile hypocrisy laid bare. You were awake," he stammered. "My mind was, and it was working perfectly. It was remembering a rainy Tuesday, 15 years ago, and a very specific clause I wrote to protect myself from a man I hoped you would never become. A clause for a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. It's a beautifully vague phrase, don't you think? It gives a lot of latitude. Your little bedside chat with Chloe more than met the criteria." Just then the door opened again. A pale, trembling Chloe Decker stood there, trailed by a grim-faced man in a suit whom Richard recognized as the head of his company's HR department. Richard Chloe's voice was a panicked squeak. "My corporate cards were all declined. They told me my employment was terminated. The man here gave me this box." She was holding a small cardboard box with a few personal items from her desk. She looked from Richard's ashen face to the woman sitting up in the hospital bed. The power dynamic in the room was palpable and terrifying. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and it was dragging her down into the abyss with it. "Get out," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Chloe. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. Chloe flinched, turned, and practically fled from the room. Richard's rage finally gave way to a desperate, pathetic plea. "Eleanor, please," he begged, taking a step towards the bed. "The Kensington deal, my entire career is on the line, everything I've worked for. You can't just take it all away. We built it together. We built it," she acknowledged, a flicker of the old pain in her eyes. "And you tried to steal it. You stood over my comatose body and plotted my death so you could run away with your 20-something mistress. The together part of our story ended then, Richard. As for the Kensington deal, it's no longer your concern. The Vance Legacy Trust now holds the controlling interest in Sterling Properties. I've already been on the phone with the other partners." They were surprisingly understanding when Benjamin explained the situation. "The wire transfer for the deposit was made an hour ago from my account. The finality of it crushed him. She hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his legacy. She had stepped seamlessly into his place, erasing him from his own life's work, with a few phone calls and the stroke of a pen. So what now? He whispered, the fight draining out of him, leaving a hollow shell. What happens to me? Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time he saw not just anger, but a profound, weary pity. I imagine your lenders will be calling soon. Your investors. You personally guaranteed many of those loans, didn't you? Always so confident. Without the assets of sterling properties to back you, you are insolvent. You have nothing. The penthouse is owned by the trust. The cars, the accounts, everything. You have the clothes on your back, and a watch that you should probably sell. I've instructed my lawyer to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, and let's get creative attempted conspiracy to misappropriate assets. You'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges. Benjamin Carter stepped forward, holding out a plain white envelope. This is a restraining order, Richard. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Eleanor. You are to have no contact. If you violate it, you will be arrested. A security detail is waiting outside to escort you from the premises. Richard looked from the envelope to his wife's face one last time, searching for any sign of the woman he married. He found none. He had killed her, in a way, and in her place a stronger, more formidable woman had been born from his betrayal. Defeated, he turned and walked out of the room, a king dethroned. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a profound silence in its wake, broken only by the steady, calm beep of the heart monitor. It was the sound of a life no longer in limbo, but firmly, resolutely in control. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Eleanor's physical recovery was arduous, but steady, driven by the same iron will she'd used to reclaim her life. The day she walked out of the hospital, leaning only slightly on a cane, she felt the Chicago wind on her face and knew she was free. She immediately took the helm of what was once Sterling Properties, and her first act was to have the name taken down. In its place, a new sign was raised, Vance Enterprises. Richard Sterling's downfall was as swift as it was spectacular. Stripped of his financial empire, his creditors descended, forcing him into a humiliating bankruptcy. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. Chloe Decker, a pawn in a game between a king and a queen, vanished into obscurity. Her ambitions turned to ash. Eleanor, however, took no joy in their demise. Her focus was not on revenge, but on reconstruction. She wasn't interested in simply building more towers. Instead, she established the Vance Foundation, funded by her company's profits, with a clear mission to provide legal and financial support for women victimized by marital fraud and financial abuse. Her story, once a private horror, became a public inspiration. She had been buried by betrayal and had clawed her way out, not just to survive, but to build something better from the wreckage. About a year later, she stood on the observation deck of the Kensington Tower, the very project at the center of the turmoil. Benjamin Carter stood beside her, looking out at the sprawling city. "Quite a view," he said softly. Richard always wanted his name on the skyline, and in a way, it is. Eleanor replied, a peaceful smile touching her lips. "This building will stand for a century, funding a foundation that will help thousands. It's a sterling legacy, just not the one he envisioned." The beep of the heart monitor was a distant echo replaced by the steady rhythm of her own resilient heart. She had taken a name tarnished by greed and redefined it, making it sterling again, but this time entirely on her own terms. The story of Eleanor Vance is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. It's a testament to the fact that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. She turned her darkest moment into her defining one, using the very tools of her oppression to architect her liberation. Her foresight and intelligence were her armor and her sword. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation of her name, her power, and her future. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like these are important, and sharing them helps us all. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. What part of Eleanor's story stood out to you the most? Let us know in the comments below.